What do I need to know about the new October 2021 child support guidelines in Massachusetts? Hi, I'm Bill Farias, founder of Farias Family Law. The guidelines are released every 4 years. So here we are in October 2021. The new guidelines are out. And so there are a number of people wondering, what do I need to know? Do I need to file a modification? How does this impact my child support order? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the highlights here. There are essentially 5 main changes that I think will have the greatest impact. If you want to read the full child support guidelines, you can go onto mass.gov, download a copy of the guidelines, and you can read through all the provisions, the explanations. There is a ton of detail, and there are some other minor changes that I'm not going to cover here, but these are the highlights. Number 1 is what I call more children, more money. And the way that this works is that under these new guidelines, subsequent children are going to result in overall a higher child support amount. And so this was already the case to some extent under the old guidelines, where there was a percentage increase in support for subsequent children for the second, third, fourth child. But under these new guidelines, that amount is higher. So what you're generally going to see is in cases where there are multiple children, the child support amount is going to be higher. The second significant change is in how childcare and healthcare costs are treated. The changes for how childcare costs are treated are most significant. Under the old guidelines, what happened was that for party paid childcare costs, the amount they pay is deducted from their gross income, and then those costs would be to some extent redistributed into the calculation and result in the other party chipping in to some extent for those childcare costs, but there was a cap. Under the new guidelines, that cap is removed. And so now, essentially what happens is if a party is paying childcare costs, that amount, up to $355 a week per child, is redistributed between the parties proportionally based on the party's available income. And so where you're going to see the greatest impact is in a situation where the recipient of child support is paying childcare costs, because what's going to happen is the payor is going to be paying child support, and then on top of that, paying a proportional share of the childcare costs that are being paid by the recipient. So those childcare costs are going to be dragged into the calculation, and basically the responsibility for those childcare costs is going to be shared proportionally based on the available income. And so what's going to happen is in these cases where you have the recipient paying childcare, the payor's liability, the amount overall that the payor is going to have to pay is going to be significantly higher. And so that's something to watch out for. In fact, I think you're going to see such astronomical numbers that it led to the task force implementing a presumption for a deviation. And so I'll talk about that in more detail later. But basically, you're going to see numbers that are so high where the court's going to have to step in and say, hey, that's too much. There's going to be a presumption here that we need to lower the child support under these circumstances. Healthcare costs, there was a minor change. So in the past, there was a deduction for healthcare expenses from the gross income of the party paying those expenses, and then there was a credit added into the calculation. That credit is now gone, and so essentially what you're left with is a deduction from gross income for the amount paid for healthcare by that party. And so you probably won't see as much of a shifting of the costs in healthcare because there's no longer a credit. But for childcare costs, really significant, because basically now what's happening is both parties are paying for childcare based on their respective incomes. The third significant change is that the maximum income level is higher. It went from $250,000 of combined income between the parties to $400,000. And so the important thing to know here is if you ran a calculation under the old guidelines, if the parties' combined gross income was higher than $250,000, you were only getting a child support amount based on $250,000 of combined income. And so then the parties in the court had to figure out whether there should be an additional amount paid above what was recommended in the guidelines. Under the new guidelines, that amount is raised to $400,000. And so if you're running a child support calculation and the parties' combined gross income is under $400,000, you're most likely getting an accurate presumptive child support amount. If the amount is above that, then you're back in a situation where you have to figure out whether some more money should be paid above what's recommended and how much. The fourth change is that there is a lower minimum child support order. And so basically what happened was the task force decided that when people are earning less than $250 a week, they cannot afford to pay $25 a week in support. That was the old minimum order, was $25 a week. Under the new guidelines, if a party is under $250, that minimum order goes down. If the party's income is $210 or less, the minimum order is $12, and from $212 to $249 a week in income, the minimum order is $20 per week. And finally, there is a new presumption for deviation. So deviation has been in play for a long time, and basically what that does is gives the court discretion to deviate from the number recommended by the child support calculation. And this new provision basically says that if the recommended child support amount is 40% or more of the payor's available income, then there is a presumption of deviation. So in other words, if the child support amount is 40% or more, the court has to deviate downward unless the court finds a compelling reason not to. And I think some of that has to do with how childcare costs are now being treated, because again, if the payor is paying a full guidelines child support amount, and on top of that, having to pay a proportional share of childcare paid by a recipient, that's going to result in astronomical child support numbers. And so I think that the reason they implemented this presumption of deviation was partly because of that change. But overall, it's in effect generally. So those are the 5 key changes. Number 1, when there are more children, the child support amount is going to be higher. Number 2, significant changes to how childcare costs are treated. Some minor changes to how healthcare costs are treated. Number 3, the maximum combined income is $400,000 for the calculation. So if you're under $400,000 of combined income between the parties, you should be getting an accurate child support number. 4, the minimum order has decreased below $25 a week for people earning less than $250 a week. And finally, that presumption of deviation. If it's 40%, if the child support amount is 40% or more of the payor's available income, then there is a presumption that that amount should be lower. If you have any other questions about this, feel free to call us 508-675-0464. You can email us at info@fariasfamilylaw.com. If you found this video helpful, you can subscribe to our channel and share it with anyone you think might benefit from it. And you can find us on social at Farias Family Law. Thank you. Have a good day.